Tonight, we journey through the enduring tapestry of ancient China, a civilization that blossomed from the fertile loess soils of its river valleys to encompass a realm of philosophical depth, technological marvels, and dynastic cycles that shaped the course of East Asian history with a continuity that inspires awe and contemplation. This is the epic of ancient China, spanning over 5,000 years of recorded history and countless millennia before that. From its prehistoric roots in the Paleolithic wanderings of early hominids who first set foot on the loess plateaus, to the splendor of the Han dynasty's golden age when silk caravans connected east and west, through the fragmented yet innovative periods that followed, the eras of Neolithic settlements where pottery first emerged, legendary Zhou origins shrouded in myth, Shang bronze mastery that created vessels of incomparable artistry, Zhou feudalism that gave birth to China's greatest philosophers, warring states' turmoil that paradoxically fostered unprecedented innovation, Qin's brutal but effective unification, and Han's imperial consolidation that set the template for 2 millennia of governance. We'll explore the terraced rice paddies that sustained hundreds of millions, the oracle bones whose cracks divined the will of heaven, the silk roads that connected worlds separated by deserts and mountains, the Confucian academies that molded the ethics of generations, and the daily endeavors of farmers tending their fields, artisans perfecting their crafts, and mandarins composing poetry while governing vast territories, all the countless souls who wove the fabric of this remarkably resilient society. As we initiate this exploration of ancient China's multifaceted chronicles, I reflect on the civilization's extraordinary resilience, rooted in the geographical embrace of its 2 great rivers, the Yellow River in the north, temperamental and flood-prone, carrying its burden of yellow loess across the plains, and the Yangtze in the south, longer and more placid, nurturing rice cultivation and dense populations in its fertile delta. These rivers provided fertility amid floods and droughts, fostering a worldview of cyclical renewal and harmonious adaptation that would permeate Chinese philosophy for millennia. This environmental foundation not only spurred agricultural revolutions that allowed China to sustain larger populations than anywhere else on Earth, but also instilled a philosophical emphasis on balance, as seen in the complementary forces of yin and yang, and the concept of the mandate of heaven that required rulers to maintain harmony between heaven, earth, and humanity. Such a setting invites thoughtful consideration. Does a landscape prone to natural calamities inherently promote ideologies of order and moral governance, or does it risk entrenching conservatism that resists disruptive change? In our contemporary world of environmental challenges and rapid transformations, China's narrative compels us to ponder how geography imprints cultural philosophies, a rumination as profound as the Great Wall that symbolized both protection and isolation, both the desire to preserve what lay within and the fear of what threatened from without. The story of ancient China commences in the ancient landscapes of East Asia, a region of loess plateaus deposited by winds from the Gobi Desert, river basins that flooded and receded with seasonal regularity, and mountainous barriers that created isolated pockets of human habitation where different cultures could develop in relative independence. Human presence in what we now call China dates to the lower Paleolithic period, around 2.5 million years ago, when early hominids, likely Homo erectus or their immediate predecessors, migrated into the area during warmer interglacial periods, following the great herds of megafauna across land bridges and open corridors that the ice ages alternately created and destroyed. These pioneering humans crafted simple stone tools from local materials, quartzite, flint, and chert, to hunt large game like mammoths whose tusks would later become prized materials, rhinoceroses that roamed the northern steppes, and giant deer that stood taller than modern horses. They hunted in the open tundras and boreal forests that covered regions now dominated by agriculture and cities. These nomadic groups, facing the rigors of glacial climates that could kill the unprepared within hours, gathered in caves that provided shelter from howling winds and prowling predators, and in open sites near water sources where game would come to drink. Evidence from Yuanmu in Yunnan province in China's southwest shows bipedal footprints preserved in volcanic ash and simple stone choppers dating from approximately 1.7 million years ago, indicating opportunistic foraging amid herds traversing verdant valleys that are now eroded hills. By the Middle Paleolithic, circa 300,000 to 40,000 Bic. Homo erectus populations had not merely survived but flourished across China's diverse environments. This is most dramatically evidenced at Lantian in Shanxi province, where fossils dating to 1.15 million years ago show a population well adapted to the temperate forests of the Wei River Valley. But the most famous site of this period is undoubtedly Zhou, located in a complex of limestone caves near modern Beijing. Here, in a dramatic cliff face riddled with caverns, lived the population, known to science as Peking Man, Homo erectus, Pekinensis from approximately 770,000 to 230,000 years ago. These cave dwellers left behind a treasure trove of evidence. Thousands of stone tools showing increasing sophistication in manufacture, the bones of animals they hunted or scavenged, and most significantly, layers of ash and charred bones that provide some of the earliest evidence for the controlled use of fire in human history. The debate continues among archaeologists about whether Peking Man deliberately kindled fires or simply maintained naturally occurring fires started by lightning strikes. The evidence suggests they could keep fires burning for extended periods, using them for warmth during the bitter winters when temperatures could plunge well below freezing, for cooking meat, which made it more digestible and killed parasites, for hardening the points of wooden spears, and perhaps for keeping predators at bay during the vulnerable hours of darkness. The tools found at Zhou evolved over the hundreds of thousands of years of occupation, developing from simple choppers and flakes to more refined implements showing the Levallois technique, a sophisticated method of stone tool production that involves carefully preparing a stone core before striking off a flake of predetermined size and shape. These tools were used for cutting meat, scraping hides for clothing and shelter, working wood, and processing plant materials. Other Middle Paleolithic sites across China paint a picture of increasing human adaptation and spread. At Hexian in Anhui province, at Dali in Shanxi, and at Zujiayao in Shaanxi, archaeologists have found fossils showing cranial features that link to modern Asian populations. Broader nasal openings adapted to humidifying cold air, robust cheekbones, and the distinctive shovel-shaped incisors still found in East Asian populations today. In southern China, in the limestone karst caves of Guizhou province, similar populations adapted to very different environments. Humid subtropical forests, where bamboo groves provided both food and material for tools, where the rivers teemed with fish and the forests with deer, wild pigs, and smaller game. The Upper Paleolithic period, spanning roughly from 40,000 to 10,000 BCE, witnessed the arrival of anatomically modern Homo sapiens in China, bringing with them behavioral and technological innovations that would accelerate the pace of cultural change. These modern humans created microlithic tools, tiny, precisely crafted stone blades that could be hafted together to create composite weapons like arrows and harpoons, making hunting more efficient and less dangerous. They crafted bone needles with eyes, allowing them to sew fitted clothing that provided better protection against the cold than simple hide wrappings. They created personal ornaments from shells, teeth, and carved bone, suggesting a sense of personal identity and perhaps social status. Most significantly, they created art. Rock art from this period, though rare in China compared to Europe, depicts hunting scenes, dancing figures, and geometric patterns whose meanings remain mysterious. These images suggest ritual practices, storytelling traditions, and symbolic thinking, the ability to represent abstract concepts through material forms. The site of Xiaonanhai in Henan province and the upper cave at Zhou, dating to approximately 18,000 BCE and thus much later than Peking Man, contain hematite, red ochre, processed and perhaps used for bodies, painting or marking important objects. These finds suggest early symbolic behaviors and rituals, possibly connected to burial practices. Indeed, the upper cave at Zhou contains what may be some of China's first human burials with grave goods. The bodies were interred with shell ornaments and bone tools, suggesting a belief in an afterlife, or at least a desire to honor the dead, to maintain some connection with those who had passed from the world of the living. The Mesolithic transition, beginning with the end of the last glaciation around 10,000 BCE, brought dramatic environmental changes. As the ice sheets retreated and global temperatures rose, the landscape of China was transformed. Tundra gave way to grasslands, forests expanded, sea levels rose, flooding coastal plains, and the distribution of plants and animals shifted northward. Human populations adapted with remarkable flexibility. Semi-sedentary communities began to appear along rivers and lakes, taking advantage of reliable food sources that didn't require constant movement. They used bows and arrows with greater frequency, harpoons for fishing in the increasingly productive rivers, and developed new technologies for processing plant foods. Shell middens along the southern Chinese coast, heaps of discarded mollusk shells mixed with ash, broken tools, and other refuse indicate populations that relied heavily on marine resources. These coastal peoples harvested oysters, clams, and other shellfish, caught fish with hooks and nets, and perhaps ventured out in simple boats or rafts to deeper waters. The warming climate also fostered the development of long-distance trade networks. Obsidian, volcanic glass prized for its sharp edges, was transported hundreds of miles from source areas to sites where it was crafted into tools. High-quality flint moved along river valleys. Marine shells traveled inland, perhaps as ornaments or as objects of ritual significance. These early trade networks, though modest compared to what would come later, were the ancestors of the famous Silk Road that would eventually connect China to the Mediterranean world. They show that even in prehistory, human communities were not isolated islands, but nodes and networks of exchange and interaction. 2. Understand Paleolithic China is to imagine daily life as it was lived by countless generations whose names are lost to time, but whose labors made everything that followed possible. Picture a family group in a cave at Zhou during the depths of winter. Outside, snow falls on a landscape of frozen rivers and bare trees. Inside, a fire burns, carefully tended, never allowed to go out entirely. For rekindling it from scratch is difficult and time-consuming. Around the fire, perhaps a dozen individuals, grandparents too old for the hardships of the hunt, parents in their prime, children of various ages. They share roasted meat from a deer killed 2 days before, the flesh still tender, the fat providing precious calories against the cold. A woman uses a bone needle to sew a hide garment, her fingers skilled from years of practice. A man chips at a stone core, producing flakes that will become scrapers and cutting tools, his movements precise and economical. Children play, but their games prepare them for adult tasks, stalking imaginary prey, practicing throws with sticks that will one day be spears. In the evening, as darkness falls and the fire is built up, perhaps there is storytelling. The old ones recall great hunts, narrow escapes from predators, locations of good flint sources, and reliable water holes. Through these stories, knowledge is transmitted across generations without writing, embedding survival skills in memorable narratives. The night sky, visible from the cave mouth, is brilliant with stars, undimmed by any artificial light. The Milky Way stretches overhead. Perhaps these ancient people wondered at the lights in the sky, created stories to explain them, felt awe at the vastness and mystery of the cosmos. This was life at its most fundamental, survival through cooperation, innovation, and adaptation. Every tool represented knowledge accumulated over generations. Every successful hunt was the result of skilled observation and practice. Every warm night by the fire was a victory over the indifferent forces of nature. The Neolithic era in China, spanning from approximately 10,000 to 2000 BCE, marked humanity's most profound transformation since the control of fire. The shift from hunting and gathering to agriculture, from nomadic movement to settled villages, from stone tools to pottery and polished implements. This change, often called the Neolithic Revolution, was not a sudden event, but a gradual process spanning thousands of years. It began independently in multiple regions of China, creating the regional diversity that would characterize Chinese civilization throughout its history. By 8000 BCE, as the climate continued to warm and stabilize after the Ice Age, human communities in northern China began deliberately planting and tending millet, foxtail millet and broomcorn millet, cereals that grew well in the dry loess soils of the Yellow River Valley. These grains could be stored for long periods. providing food security through the winter and allowing populations to remain in one place year-round. In southern China, along the Yangtze River and its tributaries, different communities domesticated rice, initially the wild ancestor Oryza rufipogan, gradually selected over generations for desirable traits like non-shattering seed heads and larger grains. Rice cultivation required very different techniques than millet: flooded paddies, careful water management, transplanting of seedlings, but it could support even denser populations than northern agriculture. The site of Jiahu in Henan province, occupied from approximately 7000 to 5800 BCE, shows early evidence of this agricultural revolution. Here, archaeologists have found grains of rice, storage pits, the bones of domesticated pigs and dogs, and, remarkably, residues in pottery vessels that chemical analysis has identified as a fermented beverage made from rice, honey, and fruit. This may be the world's oldest known fermented drink, predating wine and beer in the Middle East. In the north, the Paleolithic culture, approximately 7000 to 5000 BCE, represents one of China's earliest settled agricultural societies. Centered in Henan province, in the Middle Yellow River Valley, Paleolithic sites show the transition from seasonal camps to permanent villages. The pottery of this period is distinctive. Cord-marked vessels created by pressing twisted fibers into the wet clay before firing, creating textured surfaces that may have improved grip or simply been decorative. These vessels, though simple compared to later Chinese ceramics, represent a technological leap. Pottery allowed the cooking of foods that couldn't be roasted over fire, the storage of liquids, and the fermentation of grains for alcohol. The stone tools show increased sophistication: polished stone axes and adzes for woodworking, grinding stones for processing grain, bone needles for sewing. The houses were semi-subterranean pit dwellings, dug into the earth and roofed with thatch or wooden poles, providing insulation against summer heat and winter cold. The economy was mixed: millet farming, supplemented by hunting deer and other game, fishing in rivers, gathering wild plants, and the keeping of domesticated pigs and dogs. Dogs served as guards, hunting companions, and in lean times, food. Pigs, easier to raise in settled communities than cattle or sheep, converted household waste and forest mast into meat. The Xishan culture in Hebei province, roughly contemporary with Paleolithic, shows similar adaptations. At Xishan, archaeologists found storage pits containing thousands of pounds of millet grains, far more than a single family could consume in a year. This surplus economy, the ability to produce more than immediately needed, was essential for the development of social hierarchy, specialized crafts, and eventually civilization itself. The Yangshao culture, approximately 5000 to 3000 BCE, centered in the Yellow River Valley but spreading across much of northern China, represents a fluorescence of Neolithic civilization. Named after the type site at Yangshao village near the modern city of Xi'an, this culture is most famous for its painted pottery. The most extensively studied Yangshao site is Bampo, a village occupied from about 4500 to 3750 BCE. Here, archaeologists have reconstructed a complete Neolithic community through careful excavation and analysis. The settlement was organized with deliberate planning. Houses were arranged in rows or curves, facing inward toward a central plaza. They were of two types: circular or square semi-subterranean dwellings for families, and larger above-ground structures that may have served as communal buildings for meetings, rituals, or storage. The houses show sophisticated construction. Posts supported conical thatched roofs. Walls were of wattle and daub, woven branches plastered with clay. Floors were beaten earth, sometimes plastered with lime. Each house had a hearth for cooking and warmth, and many had raised platforms for sleeping, keeping occupants away from the cold. Damp ground. The famous Yangshao painted pottery was both functional and beautiful. Vessels were hand-built. The potter's wheel had not yet been invented in China, using coiling techniques, then painted with geometric designs in red or black pigment before firing. The designs are striking: spirals, zigzags, cross-hatching, and the famous fish motifs that appear repeatedly. These fish designs, some realistic and some highly stylized, may have had religious or totemic significance. Perhaps they represented clan symbols, or myths about the origin of the people, or sympathetic magic to ensure good fishing. Without written records, we can only speculate, but the care lavished on these designs suggests they were more than mere decoration. The Yangshao economy was based primarily on millet farming. Fields were prepared with stone hoes and wooden digging sticks. Millet was ground on stone querns, saddle-shaped grinding stones where grain was crushed by pushing an upper stone back and forth across the lower. The resulting flour could be made into porridge, flatbreads, or fermented for alcohol. But agriculture was supplemented by diverse activities, fishing with hooks, nets, and traps, hunting deer, wild pigs, and smaller game with bows and arrows, gathering wild plants, nuts, and fruits, the keeping of domesticated pigs and dogs, and in later Yangshao phases, possibly chickens. Evidence of silk production appears in the Yangshao period. Models of silkworms carved from stone, and possibly silk threads preserved in the corrosion products of bronze ornaments. If the Yangshao people were indeed producing silk, they were beginning a craft tradition that would eventually make China world famous and give its name to the great trade route connecting east and west Yangshao. Society shows evidence of increasing social stratification. Most burials are simple, with a few pottery vessels as grave goods, but some contain jade ornaments, elaborate pottery, and other wealth, suggesting differences in status. Whether this reflects hereditary class differences, achieved status through success in hunting or warfare, or ritual or religious roles is unclear. In the east, in Shandong province and surrounding areas, the Dawenku culture, approximately 4300 and 2400 BCE, developed along a somewhat different trajectory, though with clear connections to Yangshao and other contemporary cultures. Dawenku is famous for its wheel-made pottery, evidence that the potter's wheel, one of humanity's most important inventions, had reached China by the mid-4th millennium BCE. Wheel-thrown pottery could be produced faster and with greater uniformity than hand-built vessels, suggesting increased specialization and perhaps production for trade or tribute. Dawenku pottery includes elegant, thin-walled vessels with pedestal bases, elaborate handles, and sometimes perforations, creating delicate openwork patterns. The skill required to produce such vessels indicates master craftspeople working full or part-time at their craft, rather than farmer potters working seasonally. Jade ornaments become more common in Dawenku. Burials, pendants, beads, carved figures. Jade working requires tremendous skill and patience, as jade is extremely hard and can only be shaped by abrasion with harder materials like quartzite sand. A single jade pendant might represent hundreds of hours of labor, making it a display of wealth and status. One peculiar Dawenku custom was ritual tooth extraction. Many skeletons show deliberately removed incisors, apparently a cultural practice, perhaps marking adult status or clan membership. Such body modification practices are known from many cultures worldwide and represent the human tendency to mark social identity physically. Dawenku burials showed dramatic differences in wealth. Elite graves contain dozens of pottery vessels, jade ornaments, elaborately carved items, and pig mandibles, perhaps representing feasts held at the funeral or food for the afterlife. The pigs themselves were wealth, as they represented accumulated surplus that could be converted into meat for special occasions. Common burials, by contrast, have few or no grave goods, suggesting a society with significant inequality. This inequality, uncomfortable from a modern perspective, was essential for the development of civilization as we understand it. Elites, freed from daily subsistence labor, could specialize in governance, warfare, ritual, and artistic production. While northern China developed its millet-based agricultural civilization, the south was pursuing a different path based on rice. The Hemidu culture, approximately 5,000–4,500 BCE in Zhejiang province, in the Yangtze River Delta, represents this southern Neolithic trajectory. Hemidu sites are often waterlogged, preserving organic materials that usually decay. This has given archaeologists an exceptionally detailed picture of southern Neolithic life. Excavations have revealed pile dwellings, houses built on wooden posts driven into the marshy ground, elevating living spaces above seasonal floods. This construction technique, still used in some parts of Southeast Asia, required sophisticated carpentry skills and intimate knowledge of local wood types and their properties. The houses were substantial structures with mortise and tenon joinery, wooden members precisely fitted together without nails or ropes. Floors were planked, roofs thatched with reeds. Some buildings were quite large, suggesting communal use or elite residences. Hemudu pottery is distinctive, blackware decorated with incised patterns, cord marking, and sometimes applied decorations. The black color was achieved through reducing atmosphere firing, limiting oxygen during firing to create carbon-rich black surfaces. But the most important Hemudu finds relate to rice cultivation. The waterlogged deposits have preserved rice grains, rice husks, and even rice straw. Bone spades and wooden tools show the implements used for preparing paddies and harvesting crops. The sheer quantity of rice remains suggests intensive cultivation supporting substantial populations. The Hemudu economy was highly specialized for wetland environments. Besides rice farming, they fished extensively. Fish bones are abundant in the sites. They hunted water buffalo, deer, and wild pigs. They gathered aquatic plants and lotus roots. They kept domesticated pigs and water buffalo, using the latter perhaps for plowing paddies as well as for meat. Hemudu sites have yielded some of China's earliest sophisticated wooden artifacts: paddles for boats, bowls and vessels carved from single pieces of wood, structural elements showing advanced carpentry. The humid southern climate, while it preserved these artifacts, would also have made wood a preferred material, more workable and available than stone. The Liangzhu culture, approximately 3300–2200 BCE, succeeding Hemudu in the Yangtze Delta region, represents one of the most advanced Neolithic societies anywhere in the world. Recent excavations have revealed that Liangzhu society was more complex and powerful than previously imagined. Liangzhu is most famous for its jade artifacts, particularly the mysterious Kong tubes, square tubes with circular interior, openings, and bidiscs, flat circular discs with central holes. These jade objects, found in elite tombs in vast quantities, clearly had profound ritual significance. The Kong especially, with their square exteriors and round interiors, may have embodied cosmological concepts. The ancient Chinese belief that heaven is round and earth is square. The skill required to craft these jade objects was extraordinary. Liangzhu jade workers created pieces with perfectly straight lines, precise right angles, circular perforations, and elaborate decorations showing masked faces that may represent deities or spirits. All of this was accomplished with Neolithic tools, likely using bamboo drills and saws with quartzite sand as an abrasive. A single elaborate jade Kong might represent thousands of hours of skilled labor. The presence of multiple such objects in elite tombs represents accumulated wealth on a scale that suggests powerful chiefdoms or early states. The individuals buried with these treasures were clearly rulers of significant populations and territories, but Liangzhu's achievements extended far beyond jadecraft. Recent archaeological work has revealed massive hydraulic engineering projects, dams, canals, and water management systems covering hundreds of square kilometers. These systems regulated water flow for irrigation, protected settlements from flooding, and perhaps facilitated transportation. The construction of these hydraulic works would have required organizing thousands of laborers, providing them with food and tools, coordinating work across multiple seasons and years, and maintaining the systems once built. This implies centralized authority capable of commanding resources and labor on a large scale. In other words, a state or proto-state. Liangzhu settlements include walled compounds with rammed earth walls, walls built by pounding layers of earth between wooden forms, creating sturdy defensive or status-marking barriers. The largest walls enclose dozens of hectares, suggesting urban centers or elite ritual complexes. The sophistication of Liangzhu society raises questions about why it apparently collapsed around 2200 BCE without giving rise directly to Chinese civilization as we know it. Climate change, specifically increased flooding, may have overwhelmed even their impressive hydraulic works. Or perhaps social stresses, inequality, warfare, resource depletion, led to systemic collapse. Whatever the cause, Liangzhu's legacy persisted in the form of jade-working traditions, hydraulic engineering knowledge, and perhaps political concepts that were transmitted to later societies. The late Neolithic Longshan culture, approximately 3000–2000 BCE, centered in Shandong and Henan provinces, but with related cultures across much of northern China, represents the final stage before the emergence of Bronze Age civilization. Longshan is famous for its exquisitely thin black pottery, eggshell ware, vessels with walls less than a millimeter thick, achieved through combination of fine clay preparation, expert wheel throwing, and carefully controlled firing. These vessels are technical marvels, their creation a demonstration of skill that may have had social and ritual significance as much as practical function. Longshan sites show intensive agriculture, with large settlements sometimes enclosed by substantial rammed earth walls, the first clear defensive fortifications in Chinese archaeology. These walls, sometimes several meters thick and enclosing areas of many hectares, represent massive investments of labor and suggest both the resources commanded by elites and the warfare that made such defenses necessary. Scapulomancy, divination by interpreting cracks in heated animal shoulder blades, appears in the Longshan period, foreshadowing the oracle bone divination that would become central to Shang dynasty religion. This practice, using the shoulder blades of deer, cattle, or sheep, involved applying heat to the bone and interpreting the resulting cracks as messages from ancestors or spirits. Longshan's social organization clearly included significant hierarchy. Large houses, elaborate burials with jade and pottery, and evidence of specialized craft production all point to elite control. Some burials contain sacrificed individuals, people killed to accompany the deceased into the afterlife, a practice that would reach horrific extremes in the Shang dynasty. The Longshan culture represents a threshold. It had intensive agriculture supporting large populations, fortified towns, specialized crafts, long-distance trade, social hierarchy, ritual practices, and probably chiefdoms or early states. It stood on the cusp of civilization as traditionally defined. The Longshan people lacked only writing, monumental architecture, and bronze metallurgy to qualify as a civilization by most archaeological definitions. And indeed, the transition from Longshan to the Bronze Age cultures that followed, whether the semi-legendary Xia or the definitely historical Shang, appears in the archaeological record as a gradual evolution rather than a sharp break. The foundations of Chinese civilization were laid in the Neolithic, and what followed was elaboration and expansion of patterns already established. So, dear listeners, how was daily life in Neolithic villages? To truly understand the Neolithic revolution, we must imagine the daily lives it made possible. Lives very different from the mobile existence of Paleolithic hunters, yet also very different from the urban civilizations that would follow. Picture a Yangshao village in the Wei River Valley on a summer morning. The sun rises over the eastern hills, burning off the morning mist that hangs over the millet fields. Smoke rises from hearth fires as families wake and begin the day's activities. In the fields surrounding the village, men and women work together, weeding the growing millet with wooden hoes, their backs bent, their movements rhythmic. Children too young for field work chase birds away from the ripening grain, their shouts and laughter carrying across the fields. In the village, other activities unfold. An old woman, her hands gnarled but still skilled, grinds dried millet on a stone quern, the flour accumulating in a pottery bowl. She will mix it with water and cook it into porridge, or perhaps make flatbreads to bake on hot stones by the fire. A potter works at his craft, coiling clay into the shape of a large storage jar, his hands wet with slip, his mind focused on achieving smooth, even walls. When the pot is complete, he will let it dry, then paint it with elaborate designs before firing it in a kiln, a clay structure that can achieve higher temperatures than an open fire, creating harder, more durable vessels. Near the edge of the village, under roof but open on the sides, a group of women work together at weaving. They use simple looms, shuttles carrying threads back and forth, creating fabric from hemp fibers. The work is social. They talk and laugh together, share gossip, tell stories, supervise children playing nearby. A young man returns from hunting, a deer carcass slung over his shoulders. This is a prize. Meat will be shared throughout the village. The hide will be scraped and tanned for clothing or leather goods. The bones will be made into tools and ornaments. His success will enhance his status, make him more attractive as a marriage partner, earn him respect from the elders. In the central plaza, elders sit in the shade, discussing village matters. Should they clear more forest to expand the fields? Send a trading party to the salt springs 3 days' travel to the west? Arrange a marriage between their village and a neighboring community to strengthen alliances? These decisions, made by consensus or by the chief's authority, shape the community's future. As evening falls, families gather around hearth fires. Today's millet porridge is enriched with wild greens gathered from the riverbank, perhaps some fish caught in basket traps. It is simple fare, but reliable. The agricultural revolution has freed these people from the uncertainty of the hunt, though famines still occur in bad years when rains fail or locusts devastate crops. After the meal, there may be storytelling or music, songs accompanied by simple flutes carved from bone or bamboo, drums made from hide, stretched over wooden frames. Through stories and songs, the community's history and values are transmitted, teaching children about their origins, proper behavior, the spirit world, and the natural cycles that govern their lives. The stars emerge as darkness deepens. Unlike their Paleolithic ancestors who could move with the seasons, these farmers are bound to their fields, to the cycle of planting and harvest. But in return for this constraint, they have security, community, and the accumulation of knowledge and possessions that mobility made impossible. This is the Neolithic Revolution's true meaning, not just farming and pottery, but a fundamental reorganization of human life that made everything that followed possible, for better and worse. The Zhou dynasty, traditionally dated to approximately 2070, 1600 BCE, occupies an ambiguous position in Chinese history, hovering between myth and historical fact, accepted as real in traditional Chinese historiography, but still debated by modern scholars due to the lack of definitive contemporary written evidence, according to traditional accounts recorded in texts compiled much later, particularly Sima Qian's monumental records of the grand historian, Shiji, written around 100 BCE. The Zhou dynasty represents China's transition from the legendary sage kings of prehistoric times to the first hereditary dynasty, marking the beginning of China's recorded dynastic history. The story, as preserved in these later texts, is both dramatic and morally instructive, embodying themes that would recur throughout Chinese history: the virtuous ruler who receives the mandate of heaven, the establishment of proper governance, the accumulation of virtue or vice, and the loss of the mandate through immorality. The founding of the Zhou dynasty is attributed to Yu the Great, one of Chinese mythology's most beloved heroes. According to legend, Yu lived during the reign of Shun, one of the legendary sage kings who ruled through virtue rather than force. At this time, China suffered from devastating floods. The great rivers overflowed their banks year after year, destroying crops, drowning villages, and creating chaos throughout the land. The people suffered terribly, and the stability of the realm was threatened by this natural catastrophe that seemed beyond human control. Shun appointed Yu, a nobleman known for his intelligence and dedication, to solve the flooding problem. Yu's father, Gun, had previously attempted this task but had failed, using a strategy of building dams and dikes to contain the waters. After 9 years of futile effort, Gun was executed for his failure, a harsh punishment that reflected the seriousness of the crisis and the expectations placed upon those who served the ruler. Yu, inheriting his father's mission, took a different approach. Rather than trying to hold back the waters with barriers, Yu studied the landscape carefully, observing how water naturally flows, and seeking to work with nature rather than against it. He developed a comprehensive plan to dredge existing waterways, dig new channels, and guide the floodwaters safely to the sea. For 13 years, according to legend, Yu devoted himself entirely to this monumental task. He supposedly passed by his own home 3 times during this period, but never entered. So dedicated was he to the work of saving the people. This detail, whether historically accurate or not, became a powerful symbol of selfless devotion to public duty, a Confucian ideal that would be held up to rulers and officials for millennia. Yu organized massive labor forces, thousands upon thousands of workers digging channels, building levees, clearing waterways. This required not only engineering knowledge, but also administrative skills, the ability to feed and house workers, to coordinate efforts across vast distances, to maintain discipline and morale through years of difficult labor. The legend states that Yu personally traveled throughout the land, surveying every river and stream, mapping the drainage systems, determining where channels should be dug and how water should be directed. He worked alongside the common laborers, his hands calloused from wielding tools, his body hardened by years of physical toil. When the work was finally complete, the floods were brought under control. The waters flowed in their proper channels to the sea. Fields could be cultivated again, villages rebuilt. The people rejoiced, and Yu became a national hero. For his achievement, Shun named Yu as his successor, passing over his own son to choose the man most capable of ruling. This choice reflected the ideal of meritocracy over heredity, the belief that leadership should go to the most virtuous and capable, regardless of birth. Yu accepted the role and ruled wisely for many years, continuing the traditions of the sage kings. He organized the realm into 9 provinces, established systems of tribute, whereby local regions sent their special products to the central court, standardized weights and measures to facilitate trade, and created administrative structures to maintain order across the increasingly complex society. But when Yu died, something changed. Rather than selecting the most worthy person to succeed him as Shun had done, the nobles and people chose Yu's son, Qi, to become the next ruler. This decision, whether made by Qi himself, by the nobles who supported him, or by popular acclaim, transformed Chinese governance fundamentally. The principle of hereditary succession, power passing from father to son, was established. The Zhou dynasty, China's first hereditary dynasty, had begun. The age of the sage kings, where leadership was earned through virtue and demonstrated competence, gave way to dynastic monarchy, where birth determined rulership. According to traditional accounts, the Zhou dynasty lasted approximately 470 years and was ruled by 17 kings in succession. The early rulers apparently maintained the virtue and good governance of Yu, but gradually, as often happens in dynastic cycles, the quality of leadership declined. The traditional histories describe a dynasty that started well but ended badly. The early kings were wise and benevolent, but the later rulers became increasingly corrupt, self-indulgent, and tyrannical. This pattern, rise, prosperity, decline, fall, would become recognized as the natural life cycle of dynasties, a pattern that would repeat throughout Chinese history. The last king of the Xia was Jie, described in the sources as a monster of cruelty and depravity. According to these accounts, Ji was a strong man physically, capable of bending metal hooks and wrestling wild beasts. But he was morally weak and consumed by sensual pleasures. He supposedly built extravagant palaces and parks for his own enjoyment while the people suffered. He kept a harem of thousands of women. He held orgies in pools filled with wine, where naked men and women chased each other for his amusement. He executed ministers who dared to offer good advice and promoted sycophants who flattered him. Most damningly, he ignored his duties to the people and the spirits. He neglected the seasonal rituals that maintained harmony between heaven and earth. He imposed crushing taxes to fund his pleasures. He conscripted massive labor forces for building projects that served only his vanity. All of this meant, in Chinese political philosophy, that Jie had lost the mandate of heaven. The mandate was not an unconditional grant of power, but a responsibility. A ruler held power only so long as he ruled justly and maintained harmony. When a ruler became tyrannical, heaven withdrew its support, and rebellion became not merely justified, but morally necessary. Thus, when Tang, the virtuous leader of the Shang tribe, rose in rebellion against Jie, he was not a traitor, but a restorer of proper order. The overthrow of the Xia and establishment of the Shang dynasty was not a crime, but a moral necessity, sanctioned by heaven itself. This is the story as preserved in Chinese historical tradition. But what is the archaeological reality? The Erlitou culture, centered in Henan province and dating to approximately 1900 to 1500 BCE, is the leading candidate for archaeological identification with the Xia dynasty. The timing is roughly correct, and the location matches the traditional accounts of where the Xia ruled. Erlitou sites show clear evidence of an advanced Bronze Age civilization. The largest site, near the modern village of Erlitou in the Luo River Valley, covers approximately 300 hectares and contains impressive architectural remains. Excavations have revealed palatial foundations, large rectangular buildings with rammed earth platforms, wooden columns and tiled roofs. These were not simple dwellings, but impressive structures that would have dominated their surroundings, visible from a distance, announcing the power and importance of those who occupied them. The layout shows urban planning, buildings arranged along axes, with clear hierarchies of size and importance. The central palace complex was surrounded by elite residences, which in turn were surrounded by workshops and common dwellings. This spatial organization reflects and reinforces social hierarchy. The Erlitou sites have yielded bronze vessels, ritual containers for wine and food, cast using sophisticated piece mold techniques. These bronzes are simpler than those of the later Shang dynasty, but they represent advanced metallurgical knowledge and significant technological achievement. Bronze weapons have also been found: axes, dagger axes, and arrowheads. The production of bronze weapons required access to tin and copper, which had to be imported from distant sources, and the knowledge of how to alloy them properly. This suggests long-distance trade networks and specialized craftspeople. Jade artifacts appear in Erlitou sites, continuing the Neolithic tradition of jade working. These include blades, ornaments, and ritual objects, worked with great skill despite the hardness of the material. Turquoise workshops have been identified, with evidence of large-scale production of turquoise inlays and ornaments. Turquoise was highly valued and required long-distance trade to acquire, as the nearest sources were hundreds of kilometers away. Perhaps most intriguingly, some pottery vessels from Erlitou bear incised marks that might represent early writing. These marks are simple, single characters or short sequences, but if they are indeed writing, they would represent a stage intermediate between the pictograms of the Neolithic and the fully developed writing system of the Shang dynasty. The material culture of Erlitou suggests a stratified society with distinct classes. The palatial architecture and elite burials with rich grave goods indicate a ruling class that controlled significant resources and labor. The presence of specialized workshops for bronze casting, jade working, turquoise processing, and pottery production suggests craft specialists who worked full-time at their trades rather than being part-time farmers. These specialists would have been supported by agricultural surplus produced by farmers and collected through some system of taxation or tribute. The bronze weapons and palatial fortifications suggest a society where military power was important, whether for defense against external enemies or for maintaining elite control over the population. The ritual bronze vessels suggest religious practices centered on offerings to ancestors or deities. The vessels were designed for heating and serving wine and food, activities that would have been central to religious ceremonies. The fundamental question is, was Erlitou the Xia dynasty? The correlation in time and place is suggestive, but without written records explicitly identifying the Erlitou culture as Xia, we cannot be certain. Some scholars accept the identification, arguing that the archaeological evidence fits the traditional accounts well enough, and that we should trust Chinese historical tradition unless we have reason not to. Other scholars are more cautious, noting that the earliest written accounts of the Xia were composed more than 1,000 years after the dynasty supposedly ended. They argue that without contemporary written evidence explicitly identifying a site or artifact as Xia, we should suspend judgment. A third group suggests that Xia might be a collective term for multiple Neolithic and early Bronze Age cultures, or a mythologized version of a more complex historical reality. Regardless of whether Erlitou was specifically the Xia dynasty, the Xia holds enormous importance in Chinese culture and historiography. It represents the transition from prehistory to history, from legendary sage kings to documented dynasties, from Neolithic chiefdoms to Bronze Age states. The story of Yu the Great embodies ideals of selfless public service, of working with nature rather than against it, of merit being rewarded with leadership. These ideals would shape Chinese political philosophy for millennia. The concept of the mandate of heaven, introduced to explain the Xia's fall, provided a philosophical framework for understanding political change. It allowed rebellion to be conceptualized not as chaos, but as cosmic correction. Not as crime, but as moral necessity when undertaken against tyranny. The Xia, whether fully historical or partly legendary, established patterns that would recur throughout Chinese history. The virtuous founder, the prosperous middle period, the corrupt final ruler, the justified rebellion, the new dynasty. This cycle would repeat with variations for 3,000 years.